The sky over the bustling city of New Terra was a swirling canvas of purples and oranges, the twin suns casting long shadows across the metallic spires that pierced the heavens. It was a world where humans and aliens coexisted, though not always harmoniously. Among the throngs of beings walking the streets was a young man named Kael, a mechanic with a knack for fixing anything with a pulse or a power core. Kael was no stranger to the oddities of New Terra. He'd seen it all. Four-armed merchants haggling over exotic fruits, holographic advertisements that followed you down the street, and even the occasional street performer who could bend light with their mind. But nothing could have prepared him for the day he stumbled upon the old alien woman. She was hunched over, her frail form draped in tattered robes that shimmered faintly, as if woven from starlight. Her skin was a deep, iridescent blue, and her eyes, large and luminous, seemed to hold the weight of centuries. She was being harassed by a group of thugs, their faces obscured by dark hoods. They were demanding something from her, their voices harsh and guttural. Kael hesitated for a moment. He wasn't a fighter, and getting involved in alien disputes was a surefire way to end up in a med pod, or worse. But something about the woman's quiet dignity, the way she stood her ground despite her obvious vulnerability, stirred something in him. He couldn't just walk away. "Hey!" Kael shouted, stepping forward. "Leave her alone!" The thugs turned, their eyes narrowing as they sized him up. One of them, a hulking brute with a face like cracked stone, sneered. "This doesn't concern you, human. Walk away." Kael clenched his fists, his heart pounding. "It does now." The fight was short and brutal. Kael managed to land a few solid hits, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. Just as he thought he was done for, the old woman raised her hand, and a pulse of energy erupted from her fingertips, sending the thugs sprawling. They scrambled to their feet and fled, cursing in a language Kael didn't recognize. Breathing heavily, Kael turned to the woman. "Are you okay?" She nodded, her eyes softening as she regarded him. "Thank you, young one. Your courage is rare in these times." Kael shrugged, wiping blood from his split lip. "I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." The woman studied him for a moment, then reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small, intricately carved pendant. It glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to match Kael's heartbeat. "Take this," she said, pressing it into his hand. "It is a token of my gratitude. When the time comes, it will guide you." Before Kael could ask what she meant, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, her form blending seamlessly with the throngs of beings. He stared at the pendant, feeling a strange warmth radiating from it. Shaking his head, he slipped it into his pocket and went about his day, thinking nothing more of it. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal. Kael continued his work at the repair shop, fixing everything from malfunctioning hoverbikes to temperamental AI companions. But the pendant never left his side. He found himself absently touching it throughout the day, as if it were a talisman of some kind. One evening, as he was closing up the shop, a sleek, black hovercraft descended from the sky, its engines humming with a low, menacing tone. The door slid open, and a figure stepped out. He was tall, his skin the same iridescent blue as the old woman's, but his presence was commanding, regal. His eyes, sharp and piercing, locked on Kael. "You are the one who saved my mother," the alien said, his voice deep and resonant. Kael blinked, his mind racing. "Your mother?" The alien inclined his head. "I am Zorath, king of the Vey'lani. The woman you aided is Queen Mother Lira, the matriarch of our people." Kael's mouth went dry. He'd heard of the Vey'lani, of course. They were one of the most powerful alien races in the galaxy, known for their advanced technology and formidable warriors. Their king was said to be a just but ruthless leader, someone who brooked no disrespect. I didn't know, Kael stammered. She didn't say. Zorath held up a hand, silencing him. You acted without thought of reward, without knowledge of her station. That is why I have come. My mother has spoken highly of you, and I am in your debt. Kael swallowed hard. I didn't do it for a reward. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Zorath's lips curved into a faint smile. And that is precisely why you deserve one. Come. He gestured toward the hovercraft. There is much to discuss. The craft soared through the sky, leaving the city far behind. Kael stared out the window, watching as the landscape shifted from urban sprawl to lush, alien forests. They arrived at a towering palace, its spires reaching toward the heavens, its walls adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. Zorath led him through the grand halls, past guards clad in gleaming armor and servants who bowed deeply as they passed. They entered a vast chamber where Queen Mother Lira awaited. She smiled warmly as Kael approached. "Welcome, young one," she said. "I am glad you have come." Kael bowed his head, feeling out of place in such opulent surroundings. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I'm honored." Zorath stepped forward, his expression serious. "My mother has told me of your bravery, and I have seen your character for myself. The Vey'lani value honor above all else, and you have proven yourself worthy of our respect." Kael shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just a mechanic. I don't know what I could possibly do to—" "You misunderstand," Zorath interrupted. "I do not seek your service. I offer you a gift, one that will change your life." Before Kael could respond, Zorath gestured to a servant, who brought forward a small, ornate chest. Inside was a device unlike anything Kael had ever seen. It was a gauntlet, its surface etched with glowing runes, its design both ancient and futuristic. "This is the Aegis of Vey'lan," Zorath explained. "It is a relic of my people, imbued with the power to protect its wearer and enhance their abilities. It is yours as a token of our gratitude." Kael stared at the gauntlet, his mind reeling. I can't accept this. It's too much." Lyra stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saved my life, Kael. You acted with courage and selflessness, qualities that are rare in any being. The Aegis is not just a gift. It is a responsibility. Use it wisely, and it will serve you well." Kael hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. I'll do my best to honor your trust." As the days turned into weeks, Kael found himself adapting to his new life. The Aegis was more than just a weapon. It was a tool, one that allowed him to perform feats he'd never thought possible. He could repair machines with a touch, summon shields of energy to protect himself, and even communicate with the AI systems that ran the city. But with power came danger. Word of the Aegis spread, and Kael soon found himself targeted by those who sought to claim it for themselves. He was forced to rely on his wits and the skills he'd honed as a mechanic to stay one step ahead of his enemies. Through it all, he remained in contact with Zorath and Lira. They became his mentors, teaching him about the history of the Vey'lani and the responsibilities that came with wielding such power. Kael grew not only in strength, but in wisdom, becoming a protector of the weak and a champion of justice. One day, as he stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the vast expanse of New Terra, Zorath joined him. "You have come far, Kael," the king said. "You have proven yourself worthy of the Aegis and the trust we placed in you." Kael smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Zorath placed a hand on his shoulder. "The journey is far from over. There are still many challenges ahead, but I have no doubt that you will face them with the same courage and integrity that brought you here." Kael nodded, feeling a sense of purpose he'd never known before. He had started as a simple mechanic, But now he was something more, a guardian, a hero. And as he looked out at the city he had sworn to protect, he knew that his life would never be the same. In the end, Kael's reward was not just the Aegis or the respect of the Vey'lani. It was the knowledge that he had made a difference, that his actions had changed the course of his life and the lives of countless others. And as he stood there, bathed in the light of the twin suns, he knew that he had found his true calling. The old alien woman had been more than she seemed, and so, it turned out, was he.